So you've spent hours on Instagram, you've watched a ton of YouTube videos, and you've read, what is it now, 1 million blogs on how to make the best vegan cake, and you're totally convinced that the best way is to use Aquafaba, to use chia seeds, to use plant protein. If you're feeling a bit confused, then we're going to make the same vegan cake 5 different ways. We're going to compare the results and we're going to find out which one makes the best vegan cake. Plant protein is hot right now. Smoothies, shakes, snack bars, they're all using plant protein to pack in nutrition. And people like Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, they're using plant protein to make vegan products as close as possible to meat alternatives with texture and flavor that are really, really wowing people. So in our first video, we're gonna find out whether plant protein can work the same magic in vegan cakes. We're gonna compare a cake made with pea protein to the same cake made 4 other ways, all vegan, and find out which one is the most delicious. And I haven't just used the first recipe I got my hands on for each of the different methods. I baked the same cake 202 times to get the best out of each way of baking vegan cakes. So the comparison's as fair as I could possibly make it. Intro over, let's get baking. So we're going to start with the original method of making vegan cakes. And if you bought a vegan cake back in the year 2000, it was probably made using this method. It's the closest method to a traditional cake making method where sugar and margarine are creamed together to incorporate air to give a really light cake. And it also uses a manufactured egg replacer kind of product, something like this. But as margarine gained a bit of a bad rep, this method sort of fell out of favor a little bit. But I can see with the new generation of vegan butters coming along, I think this method might be due a bit of a revival in the next couple of years. So I'm going to start with creaming the sugar and the margarine on quite a high speed. I'm using speed 4 here on a KitchenAid for about 6 minutes. Whilst that's creaming, I'm going to sieve and whisk my dry ingredients together. I'm also going to mix my egg replacer with my water and give that a little whisk as well. Once the sugar and butter has been creamed and it's quite light and fluffy, I'm going to add the egg replacer into that and mix just for 1 minute on speed 1 just to incorporate. Then comes the final stage. This bit's a little bit more complex. So that means you add the first third of plant milk and half the flour and mix for 20 seconds on speed 1. Quick scrape down. Then you add the next third of plant milk and half the flour and mix for 20 seconds on speed 1. Quick scrape down, and then finally you add the last third of plant milk and mix for another 20 seconds on speed 1, giving a total mix time of about 1 minute. Once that's done, you tip out into a greased tin, quick level off with a palette knife and straight in the oven. Now we're going to make the same cake with a second method, and it's one you've all probably heard of, using chia seeds or flax seeds to create vegan eggs. And when I started my bakery 13 years ago, this method had already taken over from the margarine creaming method that we've just done, and this became the go-to way to make vegan cake. This method hangs on the party trick of chia seeds and flax seeds to create like an egg-like gel when you mix them with water. But apart from that, the main difference between this and the previous method with margarine is it uses a liquid fat. So we're going to use sunflower oil for this one, and let's get started. I'm going to grind my chia seeds in a domestic coffee grinder for 10 to 15 seconds. You will get slightly crunchy seeds in your cake if you don't grind them. I'm using black chia seeds for this recipe, so I'm going to tip my ground chia seeds into a jug, all my plant milk, quick whisk and set aside. I'm then going to mix all my wet ingredients and my sugar together on speed 3 for 5 minutes to dissolve the sugar. While that's mixing, I'm going to sieve my dry ingredients and stir them through by hand to make sure the baking powder is distributed evenly. I'm then going to add my dry ingredients to my wet ingredients and mix for 30 seconds on speed 1. Once that's mixed, I'm going to tip them out into a greased tin and bake in a fan oven for 35 minutes. So on to version 3, Aquafaba. And as most of you probably know already, Aquafaba is a liquid that you get in a can of chickpeas after you drain the chickpeas. It was discovered about 5 years ago, and if you whisk it until your arm falls off, you get a light fluffy foam in the same way that you do when you whisk egg whites. And lots of recipes use Aquafaba by folding this foam into the cake batter in the hope that those bubbles will give a light and fluffy cake. But we've tested 3 different ways of using Aquafaba. The foaming method I just mentioned, we've added sugar into the foam like you do when you make a meringue, but also a really simple way of just whisking the Aquafaba in a jug and then adding that into the wet ingredients. Both the foaming methods didn't give a lighter or a fluffier cake than the simple hand whisking method. So given that's much quicker, much simpler, that's the method we're going to use in this comparison. I'm going to whisk my aquafaba in a little bowl until slightly foamy. I'm then going to mix my wet ingredients and my sugar on speed 3 for 5 minutes to dissolve the sugar. While that's mixing, I'm going to sift my dry ingredients and hand mix them through to make sure the baking powder is evenly distributed. I'm then going to add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients. I'm going to mix for speed 1 for 30 seconds. Once that's mixed, I'm going to tip out into a greased tin and bake in a fan oven at 160 degrees C for 35 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. So on to method 4, and this one seems to be a bit of a recent trend, maybe the last couple of years or so. Loads of the blogs that I read and follow seem to be majoring on simplicity and stripped back recipes. The simplest cake recipe for this, the easiest recipe for that. Anyway, they just basically use liquid fat. And I can see the appeal of this. Why bother with the faff of grinding chia seeds and whisking up aquafaba if there's no extra benefit? And the implication of this, if this one works, then the chia in the chia method and the aquafaba in the aquafaba method, well, they weren't really doing anything. It was just the oil that was doing it. So we should definitely put this to the test, include it in the comparison and see what happens. We're going to use a neutral oil because we're looking to make a neutral vanilla cake. So I'm going to add all the wet ingredients into the mixer first with the sugar, and I'm going to mix on speed 3 for 5 minutes to partially dissolve the sugar. While that's mixing, I'm going to sieve the dry ingredients and hand stir through to make sure the baking powder is distributed. I'm then going to add the dry ingredients into the wet and mix on speed 1 for just 30 seconds. Once that's mixed, I'm going to tip it out, palette knife it and level it in a greased tin, and I'm going to bake it at 160 degrees C for 35 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. So on to our 5th and final method of making vegan cakes, and this time we're going to make one with plant protein. We all know eggs are high in protein, so it's quite logical to think that you could add plant protein into an egg-free cake to end up with the same result. Well, not all proteins are the same. Eggs have got lots of different proteins that all do subtly different jobs. So I've tested quite a few different plant proteins to see if any work, and if so, which ones. I ruled out soya protein quite early on though, because it's quite divisive and also it's an allergen, so some people wouldn't be able to eat a cake made with that. But I did test hemp, potato and pea protein against each other. The first one to fall by the wayside was hemp. It had a really off-putting strong flavour. I didn't like it at all, and it had a greenish colour, so for a vanilla cake like this, it really wasn't versatile or suitable for that kind of thing. Potato protein, well, that's not widely available in the shops yet, but I wanted this video to be future-proof, so I included it anyway. Don't worry, you can't taste potatoes in your cake. It's got a very neutral colour and flavour, and it gave lots and lots of volume. I had a really high cake. And the third one I tested was pea protein, and that gave much less volume than the potato. It gave a really deep, rich flavour, a lovely colour, and a fantastic mouthfeel. So that's the one I'm going to take into the final and compare against the other methods of making vegan cakes. So I'm going to whisk the sugar into the wet ingredients first for 5 minutes on speed 3. And I'm going to include pea protein like I would a flour here. I did try mixing it up separately with some of the almond milk, creating a paste or even like an egg, and it didn't give any better results than adding it in as a flour and was just more faff. While that's whisking, I'm going to sieve the dry ingredients. I'm going to stir those through, and it's extra important to stir this one through because the pea and the flour need to be completely mixed through. It should all turn into a uniform colour by the end. Once the sugar's finished whisking, I'm going to add the dry ingredients into that, and this time I'm going to mix for slightly longer. Because I've got less flour in this mix, this can take slightly longer mix time because there's less gluten, because there's less flour, and it does really help this cake to mix it for slightly longer. So I'm going to mix this one for 25 seconds. I'm going to do a quick scrape down, and I'm going to mix for another 25 seconds, both on speed 1. Once that's mixed, I'm going to tip it out, exactly the same as before, into a greased tin, quick flatten off with a palette knife, and then straight into the oven at exactly the same temperature of 160 degrees centigrade for 35 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. Right, so before we get into the fun bit and the tasting, let's just do a quick Instagram test. I'm really happy with how they all came out. They all look pretty good, to be fair. Probably the chia and the creamed one are the least pretty of all of them. You can see on the creamed one here, for example, because the sugar hasn't been whisked into the plant milk, it hasn't fully dissolved, and you can see a few crystals of sugar on the top there. The pea one is really nice and golden. The aquafaba is really high and looks really full and airy. But the real surprise here is the oil one. The simplest cake of all, wins the rise test. It's got slightly more volume than all of them. It's got a really nice flat top to it all as well. So let's just cut a slice of each of these now and get tasting. Right, so the results. So who comes in last place in fifth? Well, it is the Chia cake. This one looks the least appealing to my eyes anyway, and it's the most dense to eat. It's a tiny bit chewy. The flavor's okay, but this isn't going to persuade anyone thinking of going vegan that they can do so without compromise. Fourth place, that goes to the oil cake. And the oil cake really surprised me. I was really pleased how that came out. It looks really, really good. It's got a very slightly sort of fried fat taste to it. Tastes a tiny bit like a donut. Wasn't what I was going for. Don't think that's going to impress your vegan friends. Third place, right, Aquafaba this time. And this one looked really good as well. I was really happy with that. It's got a slightly nicer flavour than the oil one and the Chia one. But it's not light and fluffy like I was expecting. It's actually quite sticky. It's very moist, but it's right on the edge of being a little bit claggy and a little bit hard to eat. And this was the best I could get out of the Aquafaba method, as the many, many drier versions I tried ended up being too bready. The final two, both of the final two, have got a really nice cake texture with a nice short crumb that melts in your mouth. But in second place, it's got to be the creamed cake. It's less chewy than the last three, and it's a bit drier. So while you get a really soft crumb, I don't think it's going to stay fresh for very long. But on the upside, it really is quite delicious, so I'm not sure it's going to hang around for very long anyway. So I was really impressed by that method. The biggest drawback on that one is the faff involved in making it, the creaming process. And if you're on a healthy vibe, then maybe this one with margarine and a manufactured egg replacer is not going to be for you. So the winner is the cake made with pea protein. It's got a similar texture to the cream cake. It's got a short, melt in your mouth, tender crumb. But what seals the deal here is the indulgence level. Somehow the pea locks in the vanilla and the sweetness to give a really full, rich, buttery flavour. It's absolutely fantastic. It definitely claims the title of the best way to make vegan cake. Cherry on top, it's the second simplest cake to make here. The no faff method, and it's super, super consistent. The only downside, I suppose, is the cost of the pea protein. It isn't the cheapest thing to buy, but there's not much in this cake, so a little goes a long way. And it's definitely worth it. That is our winner in today's video. So I hope you found that nerdy baking session interesting. I'm gonna bring you lots of recipes using this method on the channel. So hit me up in the comments, let me know what kind of cake you want me to make using this method. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notifications of when my next recipe goes live. Thanks for watching, and I hope you can join me in the next video. See you soon.